Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Susana always believed she had the perfect family. She got married 3 years after graduating from university to her former classmate Pedro. They met by chance in the courtyard where their parents lived, struck up a conversation, and things took off from there. In school, they never paid attention to each other, but as adults, they had a lot in common: similar interests, views on life, and even culinary preferences. Their rose and candy stage lasted about 3 months, after which they mutually decided to get married. Both were financially stable, established in their careers, and had savings by that time. The newlyweds took out a mortgage for a spacious apartment in a prestigious neighborhood, splitting the down payment equally. The monthly payments were high but manageable for a young family. Pedro worked at a thriving IT company, while Susana worked as a lawyer. Their salaries were sufficient to cover the mortgage and live a comfortable life. Later, children arrived in the family, first a son, then a daughter 2 years later. Susana grew tired during her long maternity leave, and money was tight during that period. So, when the little ones finally went to daycare and their mother returned to work, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They appeared to be an exemplary family from the outside, with a well-organized and thought-out daily routine. Pedro worked remotely from home, allowing him to take care of the children, picking them up from school, helping with homework, and driving them to various activities. Susana, on the other hand, spent the entire day at the office. When she came home, she prepared dinner, and they all gathered around the table in the living room, a tradition they had established. They also had annual trips to the seaside and enjoyed family outings on weekends, including movie nights, excursions to nature, and visits to shopping malls. Susana loved this predictable life. The children were growing up, achieving success, and her husband supported her in all her endeavors. Their family felt like a well-coordinated team. But today's call from her friend Viola made her doubt it. Viola, a former colleague of Susana's, still worked at the city administration. Her office windows overlooked the schoolyard, where Susana's son attended boxing training twice a week. Pedro would bring him there. Today, Viola had a strange conversation with Susana. She called her during lunch with an odd question. "Do you have your kids enrolled in a new school?" "No," Susana exclaimed in surprise. "They're still attending the gymnasium." "Why do you ask?" "Well, I see Pedro's car at the school gates every day at the same time. Like right now, he just pulled up." "It got me wondering," Viola replied. "He's taking Jorge to boxing training," Susana answered. "Oh, I see," Viola murmured and quickly changed the subject. Having finished the conversation with her friend, Susana deepened thought. What she had learned was strange, too strange. There was no plausible explanation. Why did Pedro go to the school every day? And during lunchtime? After all, their son only had boxing training twice a week and at completely different times. Pedro's office was on the opposite side of the city. Perhaps Viola was mistaken. Although, knowing her meticulous friend, Susana dismissed that possibility right away. In the evening, she carefully extracted all the details of the day from her husband. According to his account, everything was as usual. He worked from home until lunchtime, then picked up the kids from the gymnasium, fed them, and helped with their homework. He went to the office, came back, took their daughter Carolina to her dance studio. Jorge didn't have any training that day. Judging by Pedro's story, his car couldn't have been near that school during lunchtime. But Viola had seen it. It seemed suspicious. Susana decided not to ask her husband direct questions and decided to find out everything herself. The next day, she took a few hours off from work and went to the school. Nearby was a coffee shop with transparent walls, like an aquarium. Susana chose a table in the back, offering a perfect view of the schoolyard, while she remained hidden from the street, a perfect spot for observation. At lunchtime, indeed, her husband's car pulled into the parking lot. Susana tensed up. What would happen next? Pedro was clearly waiting for something or someone. A crowd of students poured out onto the porch. Apparently their classes had just ended. Little ones with huge backpacks, middle schoolers, high school students, all mixed together. It was a noisy, boisterous, colorful group. And then Susana noticed her, the slender, tall girl heading straight toward her husband's car. She appeared to be around 20 years old, perhaps a young teacher. The youthful nymph in a fitted coat and elegant heeled boots confidently opened the car door and settled into the passenger seat. Pedro leaned toward her and kissed her. Susana couldn't believe what she was seeing. It seemed that her husband and this young lady had been involved for a while. How did she not notice anything? And Pedro? Was he some kind of brilliant actor? His behavior remained entirely ordinary. If it weren't for Viola's phone call, Susana wouldn't have had the slightest suspicion of his infidelity. So, her husband had another woman, that was a fact. And she was quite young. Strangely enough, Susana didn't feel any pain at that moment. She didn't even feel fear at the thought of losing her husband. Instead, she felt unpleasant, even disgusted, nausea rising in her throat. What troubled Susana even more was the question of what to do about the children. They loved their father, and he spent a lot of time with them. How would their son and daughter react to their parents' divorce? As for trying to salvage the relationship, Susana didn't consider it. The scene she had just witnessed rendered Pedro utterly contemptible and unworthy of forgiveness in her eyes. The woman gathered herself, ordered coffee and a slice of her favorite pizza. During lunch, she contemplated her next steps. Creating a scene today was clearly not an option. She needed to prepare properly for her departure. She had children, and she had to secure a financial foundation for herself and them. Many stories immediately came to mind, where husbands, for the sake of new women, left their families with nothing. No, that wouldn't fly with Susana. She would ensure her children lacked nothing. They were already facing stress. And Pedro, if he wanted to build new relationships with a young lover, let him start from scratch. Want to play? Get ready to pay. From that day on, Susana began to look at her relationship with her husband differently. Romance and mutual attraction between spouses had long disappeared. Before, she thought it was normal for people living together for so many years that their bond simply transitioned to another level. However, they became reliable partners who faced daily hardships and raised children together. But now, it turned out Pedro simply found someone else. Well, good for him. In light of these revelations, the neighborly relations with her husband already pleased Susana. It was easier to pretend that everything was going as usual and prepare for her departure. Now, the frequent absences of her husband were seen differently. Sometimes he was inconveniently called away on business trips, sometimes he had to urgently come to the office on weekends. And sometimes in the evenings, Pedro would take the car and go out to unwind. He said that sitting inside four walls all day, working, and taking care of the children was difficult. I need, quite literally, a breath of fresh air, explained the man. It's like recharging, taking a ride with music through the city at night. And now, I feel energized. Susana understood her husband and granted him the right to temporary solitude and relaxation. During her maternity leave, she herself wanted to escape and not be constantly at home with the children. She considered these evening outings of her husband as an ideal solution to the problem because Pedro was indeed doing a lot for their family. Now, when her husband was getting ready for another such outing, Susana understood that he was probably meeting his mistress. Susana discovered the identity of that girl when she learned about Pedro's infidelity. Obtaining information in the age of social media turned out to be an easy task. The woman simply visited the school's website and looked at photos from local events. In one of the pictures, she saw her, the beauty with a slender figure and shiny chestnut hair. The girl was tagged as Aurora in the photo. Susana clicked on the link and ended up on her profile page. It turned out that she was 18 years old. The girl was passionate about creating polymer clay jewelry and adored cats. And she also listened to pop music and frequented the gym. That was the secret to her stunning figure. The information about her relationship with a married man, Aurora, certainly wasn't revealed in her profile. But there were a few photos here that indicated the girl had an admirer. Here, she posed with a huge bouquet of roses, and the caption below proudly proclaimed, "Beloved surprised me." In another picture, Aurora sat with a teddy bear the size of a wardrobe, and Susana read the words below, "I want to hug you like this too." However, there wasn't a single photo of the mysterious suitor. Well, it's unlikely that the girl's parents would approve of a young girl being involved with a married, older man. And Pedro certainly had no reason to publicize it. So, Aurora kept it hidden. It was intriguing to think about what could attract such a young person to her mature husband. He wasn't wealthy enough for girls to throw themselves at him. Although, perhaps the foreign car and prestigious job made Pedro a prince in the eyes of the young girl who had recently finished school. Unlike her peers, an adult man could afford expensive gifts, shared trips, and visits to elite restaurants. Maybe all that superficial glitz and glamour had dazzled the young girl. Or perhaps it was genuine love. After all, the girl was very young and inexperienced. Susana understood from her own experience that at that age, established men in their 30s often seemed more attractive than pimply, foolish boys. It made her wonder how they could have met, when and under what circumstances. Why didn't Pedro stop the fact that the girl was so young? Yes, she was 18, legally an adult, and she even looked older. But still, the age difference was significant. Susana seemed to be handling the situation well. At least, she approached it with a cool head. She skillfully concealed her tracks while simultaneously starting to save money in an account opened in her sister's name. Her husband's salary went towards household expenses, groceries, clothing, utility bills, and the children's activities. Meanwhile, Susana's earnings accumulated and multiplied, becoming her safety net. It was all for the sake of the children. The woman prudently opened the account in her sister's name to ensure that these savings wouldn't be considered jointly acquired property, which, as known, is divided equally in case of divorce. And yet, the woman was deeply concerned. She consciously tried to convince herself that her husband's despicable act hadn't truly hurt her. But still, thoughts of Pedro's betrayal constantly spun in her head, sometimes even disrupting her sleep. And all the while, she had to pretend that nothing was happening. She had to believe in her husband's absences and his calls to the office on weekends. This pretense turned out to be the most challenging aspect of the entire situation. The woman constantly had to push herself, respond to her husband in a calm tone, smile at his jokes, and sometimes even care for him. Yes, Susana knew why she was doing all of this. She had a clear and specific goal, to prepare for the end of their relationship. But she was still human after all. In the end, Susana had a hypertensive crisis and ended up in the hospital. In the therapeutic department, she had plenty of time to gather herself and rest. Away from her husband, whom she had to feign ignorance in front of, Susana quickly felt better. She realized action was needed as soon as possible, dragging it out wasn't an option. Even her own body rebelled against this situation. The head of the department, a young and very talented doctor named Arturo Rodriguez, shared the same opinion. He paid great attention to the psychosomatic causes of many diseases, and he considered Susana's case to be just that. The test results and examinations indicated that she was practically healthy. However, her blood pressure was still fluctuating without any apparent reason. Maybe you have some stressful situation in your life? Arturo Rodriguez asked during his rounds, looking intently into the patient's eyes. Next to him, Susana always felt reassured. The doctor's voice sounded enchanting, his eyes exuded confidence. After conversing with him, Susana felt a surge of strength and an energetic boost. And now, he was asking about the situation in her family. For some reason, it seemed that his interest went beyond professional reasons. His gaze hinted at something more. Yes, lately things haven't been going smoothly with my loved ones, with my husband. I hope he's not physically abusing you. No, not at all. He's never laid a hand on me. It's not about that. Susana smiled at the handsome doctor and suddenly confessed, he has a mistress. Arturo was momentarily taken aback by the patient's revelation, but he quickly composed himself and smiled. Is that all? Is it worth worrying about such foolishness from your spouse? What kind of idiot would betray such a beautiful wife? The compliment warmed Susana's heart. She had always been attractive and knew it, but recently she had forgotten about her own beauty. There was no time for it: family, work, household responsibilities. And now this situation too. The doctor reminded her how nice it was when a man sincerely considered her beautiful and looked at her like that. There was clearly admiration in Arturo's eyes. His compliment was definitely not perfunctory. For the rest of the week during which Susana was in the hospital, Arturo behaved as usual, politely, reservedly, slightly distant, as expected of a doctor with patients. But Susana had already realized that she had captivated this man. She often caught him looking at her and felt a clear sympathy. How pleasant it was! Like a balm for her plummeting self-esteem. And besides, Arturo himself was very attractive, tall, broad-shouldered, with the right features of determination on his face. And he was a doctor, saving lives. Noble, intelligent, composed. When Susana entered his office for her discharge, the doctor finally mustered the courage. Honestly, I really liked you. It's a pity that I have to discharge you. But we can't keep patients here without serious indications for longer, unfortunately. Susana smiled. The usually confident and bold man now looked embarrassed and excited. I understand you're married. The situation with your spouse is not easy right now, but you still have a family, you have children. I don't want to be the one who pushes you towards a final separation. So, you won't be, Susana smiled at him. She had been eagerly waiting for a reciprocal step from Arturo. She also regretted having to be discharged and realizing that they would never see each other again. You won't be the cause of our separation. I have already made up my mind. I definitely won't stay with my husband. I'll take care of a few important matters and file for divorce. It's nice to hear, confessed Arturo. But still, think about it some more. I have your phone number, take mine. When you're ready, when you've made up your mind for sure, call me. Anytime. I'll be waiting eagerly. Susana took the folded piece of paper from his hand. Of course, she would call, but a little later. Right now, she really had a lot to do. As Arturo handed her the note, he held her hand in his for a long time. And then he gallantly kissed her hand and smiled radiantly. At home, Susana was immediately bombarded with a torrent of information. The children missed her dearly, clinging to her from both sides and simultaneously updating her on the situation. Mom, I got third place in the boxing tournament. Her son joyfully shouted into one ear. Mom, I had a fight with Camila because of Esther. His sister, occupying the other ear, didn't fall behind. Mom, Dad used to feed us eggs in the mornings, not porridge like you. But I want porridge. Mom, are we going to the zoo now? Mom, did they cure you well? Mom, 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 Mom. After the calm and tranquility of the hospital, Susana's head quickly started spinning at home, but she was happy to see her children again. Yes, she had missed her cozy apartment very much. Especially the bath and the soft, wide bed. All right, let Mom rest, Pedro ordered, sitting down next to her. We managed just fine. I'm a bit tired, of course. Finally, in the evening, I'll go for a ride around the city, relax. Maybe I'll drop by the bar with Goyo. You don't mind, do you? If you're feeling unwell, I'll stay home. No, go ahead, of course. You deserve it. Susana understood that while she was in the hospital, Pedro hardly had any time for his mistress. Most likely, the girl was being capricious, throwing tantrums, and worrying. Maybe she even threatened to end their relationship. And now, at the first opportunity, Pedro rushed to Aurora to make amends. Poor guy. Susana took a bath, tidied up a bit, and prepared dinner. Pedro, as always, helped her with household chores, but at exactly 8 o'clock, he practically ran out of the house. He was in such a hurry that he didn't even put on his jacket, even though it could get quite chilly in the evenings. Pathetic sight. Susana chuckled to herself, watching her husband hastily jump into the car and hit the accelerator. At that moment, a muffled ringing came from deep inside the laundry cupboard. It sounded like a mobile phone alert, but no one in their family had that ringtone. Susana opened the cupboard door, and the sound was coming from somewhere at the bottom. There, beneath the towels and sheets, she discovered an unfamiliar phone that was currently demanding attention. Susana looked at the mobile phone in bewilderment. She guessed it belonged to Pedro. Most likely, it was his means of communication with his mistress, a way to keep everything hidden from her. Today, her husband was in such a rush that he forgot about the phone. And Aurora, apparently, had grown impatient and was calling with her usual complaints or requests. The phone fell silent, and Susana entered the messenger app. Yes, it wasn't right to read someone else's messages. But it wasn't any worse than betraying one's wife and engaging in a clandestine relationship with a young girl. Judging by everything, Pedro was deeply entangled with the young lady. At least, he put up with all her whims and tantrums. And the young girl had quite a few of them. In particular, Aurora had been giving him a hard time during Susana's stay in the hospital. He had to spend all his time with the children. The mistress felt deprived of attention, and she didn't like it one bit. Susana's assumptions were correct. Aurora claimed that the old hag intentionally faked an attack to get a break from the children, and Pedro is such a fool to believe it. And he's not a man at all. She even suggested sending the children to a boarding school temporarily. Just wait and see, when your old lady finds out, she'll suddenly turn out to be as healthy as a bull. Outrageous message. Susana felt herself boiling with anger. Aurora was trying to dictate to her husband what to do with their children. Any normal man would explode at the suggestion of sending his son and daughter to a boarding school, but Pedro tactfully tried to convey to the girl that he couldn't do such a thing. And it seemed he didn't even notice her insults like doormat, not a man, henpecked. Obviously, Aurora wasn't far from the truth. As for Susana herself, Pedro's new lover referred to her as nothing more than an old hag and a crone, and Pedro never attempted to reprimand the brazen girl. What is it that she does that literally ropes men in? Or is it all thanks to her freshness and youth? Previously, Susana even felt sorry for Aurora, a young girl getting involved with an older man, getting tangled up, maybe even falling head over heels in love with him. Not understanding that Pedro was simply using her youth and enjoying himself while she wasted her precious years on a troubled relationship. But the correspondence opened Susana's eyes. The girl was not so naive and simple-minded, far from it. Without any remorse, she begged her husband for money and gifts, behaving promiscuously and arrogantly. In this relationship, the victim was more likely Pedro, who fell for the beauty and youth and endured all of Aurora's tantrums. The next evening, when the family gathered for dinner, Susana initiated a serious conversation with her husband. "Money has been tight for us lately," said the woman as she placed a salad in front of her spouse. "And I've come up with an idea." "Yeah, we've been paying less," Pedro agreed. "Our company is facing difficulties." Susana thought to herself, "I know all about your difficulties." Just yesterday, she read a message from Aurora, who was asking Pedro for a significant sum of money to buy a new phone. "Well, what's your idea? Why did you hesitate?" Pedro reminded her. "Well, there's currently a promotion at the bank, the first car. They offer a huge discount on auto loans for first-time car buyers. Let's transfer our Volkswagen to me. I've never owned a car, so I qualify for the promotion. We'll handle it as a buy-sell transaction and save a substantial amount. What do you think?" "That's a great idea," supported her spouse. He liked the scheme proposed by his wife. After all, Aurora was becoming more demanding every day. It was difficult to juggle between her and the family, but with a decent sum of money in his hands, he would be able to set aside an amount from his salary for a summer vacation with Aurora. It would be a wonderful time at the beach, no problems, no stress. Just him and Aurora. Soon, Susana became the sole owner of the car. She had obtained her driver's license long ago but had never gotten behind the wheel after passing the exam. She was afraid and couldn't bring herself to do it. Pedro supported her in that timid decision. He said that if she had such fear, there was no need to force herself. After all, they had him in the family, an experienced driver. But now, Susana thought differently. She simply had to overcome this fear because Pedro wouldn't be with them for much longer, and the car would become hers after their divorce. Colleague lawyers had advised her on how to structure the purchase so that the property would be considered solely hers and not jointly acquired. That's why Susana took her phone and began monitoring nearby driving schools. She needed to take a few driving lessons to feel confident on the road. Aurora had already turned 18. She recently graduated from high school but didn't enroll in college this year. Instead, she worked as an assistant cheerleading coach at her former school. The girl felt more mature than her peers. Everyone matures differently. Aurora's friends constantly talked about and focused on trivial things: college studies, movies, books, and dating boys. She had long dreamed of serious relationships. Ones where she would feel secure, like behind a stone wall. Where he would fulfill all her wishes and whims, constantly surprising and conquering her. None of her peers fit the role of such a prince: tall, thin, pimply, and broke. The only hope was that parents would provide them with a few banknotes, barely enough for a movie and McDonald's outing with a girl. No, Aurora didn't want that kind of happiness. She knew her worth perfectly well. Nature had been kind to the girl, tall, slender, with mesmerizing blue eyes, thick, slightly curly hair of a beautiful chestnut shade, and impeccably smooth skin. Even at the age of 14, Aurora noticed that adult men turned their heads in her direction, not to mention the schoolboys who showered her with attention. The girl understood that she deserved a real prince and lived in anticipation of that meeting. She didn't just wait by the stove, she put in a lot of effort to meet the ideal man she had been dreaming of. Aurora went to the gym, regularly visited a cosmetologist, and even engaged in cheerleading to stay in shape. Later, she became an assistant to their coach, and their training sessions took place in the school gym. One day, she saw him in the school lobby, a handsome and fit man wearing branded sneakers and stylish jeans, expensive watches on his wrist, and a trendy model of a phone in his hands. A keychain with car keys lay on the bench next to him. The logo on it was Volkswagen. Along with a crowd of other parents, the man was waiting for someone, probably his child from the boxing section. Boxing training coincided with the cheerleading sessions. That evening, he didn't pay any attention to her. He didn't even notice the girl as he was busy with his phone. But she observed him closely. He didn't look like the other fathers who were there to pick up their kids, so stylish, modern, and sporty. He had a light stubble on his strong chin and pleasant gray eyes. There was one disappointing detail: a wedding ring on his ring finger. Aurora didn't miss any details of his appearance. At home, the girl thought a lot about this person. He had definitely caught her attention. She wanted to get to know him better. What if he was the prince she had been waiting for all this time? After the next training session, Aurora walked into the lobby with a specific goal: to see the man she found so appealing again. And indeed, he was there, this time without his phone. The girl walked past him and felt his interested gaze. Well, no wonder, she had prepared herself well for this encounter. She wore tight jeans and a revealing top. The warm September weather allowed Aurora to showcase all the advantages of her luxurious figure. Other dads also showed interest, but those gray men with big bellies didn't interest her. It was all for him, as he stood out so favorably among other men. And her efforts didn't go to waste. He followed her with his eyes as she walked by. Since then, after each training session, Aurora made eye contact with the man she liked, and he almost always looked away. Perhaps he was shy or didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable. They were almost acquainted, and the girl decided it was time to take action. That evening, Aurora took a backpack filled with various things: cosmetics, notebooks, pens, sunglasses, and so on. As she walked past her prince, she purposely dropped her bag, and its contents scattered on the floor. The girl let out a small cry and hurried to pick them up. Of course, the man rushed to her aid. Later, Pedro would say that this accident with the backpack was the best thing that ever happened to him. Aurora smiled silently. She never told him about her little trick. That's how they met. Pedro took the initiative himself, and the prior preparation didn't go to waste. The girl had to lie and say she was already 20 years old. Later, of course, the truth about Aurora being 18 came out, but by then, it was too late. The relationship had already moved beyond the stage of sweet courtship. And what did it matter? She had just added 2 years to her age. Pedro practically idolized her. He found time and money to fulfill every wish of his young lover. Everything was just as Aurora had dreamed: fancy restaurants and trips in a beautiful car. The only downside was that Pedro was a married man. He had a wife and children, which meant he had many responsibilities towards them. He couldn't rush to his mistress at her every beck and call, no matter how much he wanted to. He had to be discreet. Pedro found the time for their dates, but it wasn't always convenient for Aurora. She despised Susana, who constantly disrupted their plans. Only when Aurora flew with Pedro to the big city were they truly free and happy. They walked around without hiding, kissed on the streets, and strolled arm in arm. He told his family he was going on a business trip, and the girl explained her absence to her parents by saying their team had a competition. It was such a marvelous time. If it weren't for Susana, this life would have become ordinary. Aurora, for her part, encouraged Pedro to leave his family and often tried to act cunningly and discreetly. But sometimes she couldn't control herself and would throw tantrums. Pedro seemed willing to divorce his wife, but he hesitated because of the children. Aurora understood that sooner or later she would emerge victorious. But celebrating triumph was premature. And then Susana ended up in the hospital, a hypertensive crisis. Of course, Pedro's wife wasn't that feeble to suffer from high blood pressure to such an extent. She must have noticed that her husband was distancing himself, and that's what attracted his attention. What a cunning woman she was. And indeed, Pedro, left alone with the children, temporarily ceased to meet his mistress. He sent love messages, expressing his love and longing. In the evenings, after putting the kids to bed, he would call her, but during that period, they never met. It was hurtful to feel like a second priority after the family. Aurora had no intention of accepting that. When Susana was discharged, Pedro rushed to her on the same evening with a bouquet of flowers and a cute plush cat. He knew that the girl adored such funny toys. "We need to do something about this," Aurora said. "I don't want to share you with her." "You're not sharing, trust me. We've been living as neighbors for a long time. We're just raising the children together. Then get a divorce. I can't. I can't do it yet. We have a lot of unresolved financial issues. Once we sort them out, then our dream life will begin." Aurora didn't delve into the details of the unresolved financial issues in Pedro's family. Personally, she was satisfied with Pedro's financial support. He bought her a new fancy phone, and he even promised that they would fly to Cyprus in the summer. Her anger towards Susana continued to grow. It seemed to Aurora that this woman intentionally burdened Pedro with tasks to tie him to herself and their home. Otherwise, how could she explain that their meetings became less frequent? Pedro would say it was because of work. He had been taking on extra jobs lately to never deny anything to his princess. He was very intelligent and highly sought after, a quality that, of course, commanded respect. And yet, it wasn't just about work. Susana had become incredibly brazen. She didn't want to take care of the children herself, manipulated her husband, and took advantage of his integrity and attachment to their son and daughter. Well, Aurora would show her. And the girl made up her mind. She knew where Susana worked and one day ambushed her right outside the office doors. As Susana passed by, she glanced at the girl. Pedro's wife didn't know his mistress. She had no idea that someone hated her so vehemently. Aurora considered this fact her undeniable advantage. She would catch her rival off guard, hurt her, and throw her off balance. How long she had dreamed of this moment. Wait! Aurora stopped Susana. You don't know me, but we really need to talk. Really? Susana shrugged. She appeared composed, but not for long. Soon her calmness would give way to panic, perhaps even tears and hysteria. Let's go to the park. We have a serious conversation ahead. Are you sure you haven't mistaken me? Susana inquired, looking at Aurora as if she were an empty space. I really don't know you. What could we possibly talk about? What common ground could we have? You're mistaken, we do have something in common. Aurora smiled sarcastically at her own joke. Let's go, after all. Fine, Susana agreed. Aurora couldn't help but note that the old hag actually looked quite decent, well-groomed and attractive, with a slender figure. The park was deserted at that hour. The girl got straight to the point. Your husband and I love each other, and it's been going on for a long time. Really? Surprisingly, Susana remained calm. Aurora hadn't anticipated such a weak reaction, and it threw her off guard. Aren't you surprised? Not really. Pedro has always been a liar and a pushover. I'm even glad to get rid of him. I see. Aurora suddenly realized. So, it's your tactic to tarnish your husband's reputation so that he becomes unwanted by me. How cunning of you. What nonsense, Susana sighed wearily. You, young girl, have really gone too far. Whatever you may think, he's mine. You're already old, his choice is obvious. Don't even hope to save your family. Aurora grew increasingly heated, while Susana remained composed and unaffected. Is she a robot or something? Her husband is being taken right from under her nose, and she acts like it's nothing. She's definitely not normal. How noble of you to warn me about it. Perhaps Pedro didn't have the courage, as usual. Does he know that you're talking to me right now? Aurora fell silent. She realized that Pedro probably wouldn't appreciate her taking matters into her own hands. He had promised to tell Susana everything himself when the time came, once certain important family matters were resolved. No, the girl admitted, Pedro doesn't know anything. He planned to have this conversation, but a little later. And you couldn't wait and came to express your discontent to me, Susana continued. Do you think my husband will appreciate this initiative? Aurora knew he wouldn't. Of course, Pedro would be angry. But what could she do now? There was no turning back. And the girl didn't regret her actions. After asserting her rights to Pedro against his wife, she felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. I suggest this, let our unpleasant conversation remain a secret from Pedro for now. I don't mind, Aurora agreed. In reality, she was all for it. But why was Susana being so secretive? On the contrary, this situation was a perfect chance to play on Pedro's guilt and portray his mistress as a troublemaker and hysteric. Why miss such an opportunity? Well, that's fine. Let things go as they are for now. From my side, I promise not to interfere. We need to resolve certain issues, and then I will file for divorce. What are they constantly resolving? Aurora thought, remaining alone in the park. The conversation didn't go at all as she had expected. Whether it was good or not was unclear. One thing was certain, Susana was cold, showing no emotions. Yes, Aurora would have torn out all of her hair if she were in her position. The girl was even prepared for a fight. She had a pepper spray canister in her bag, but it wasn't needed. When Susana stepped out onto the office porch that evening, she immediately spotted her, Aurora. It wasn't difficult to recognize her husband's mistress. Susana had seen plenty of her photos. The woman frequently sent her pictures to the secret mobile phone hidden in the depths of the lingerie drawer. Susana had made a habit of periodically checking it, seizing convenient moments when her husband was in the bathroom or asleep. However, Pedro always took the secret phone with him when he left the house. He only forgot it once on the day of Susana's return from the hospital when she discovered this means of communication. And now, this young beauty, whose photos and lacy lingerie filled the gallery of that very phone, stood here near Susana's office. It was unlikely that the girl ended up here by chance. It was very difficult for Susana to pretend that she didn't know who Aurora was. When passing Pedro's lover, she only glanced at her, but that was enough to appreciate all the qualities of the family wrecker. Aurora possessed natural beauty, clean skin, huge blue eyes, and hair of a marvelous chestnut color that glistened in the sunlight. Susana almost understood her husband. It was hard for any man to resist such a gift of fate. As expected, Aurora called out to her. They moved aside for an important conversation in the park, where the young woman dumped a heap of accusations and insults on her rival. It turned out that the girl genuinely believed that Susana was doing everything in her power to keep Pedro by her side. According to Aurora, this explained the constant requests to babysit the children, fabricated urgent matters, and even the incident of Pedro's wife ending up in the hospital. Once again, Susana was grateful that, by chance, thanks to a phone call from a former colleague, she was aware of the situation. Otherwise, the appearance of the young beauty would have been a real shock to her. Now, she could maintain her composure and respond to the audacious girl with an icy calmness that seemed to fuel Aurora even more, in Susana's opinion. She almost enjoyed what was happening. It was very satisfying to witness the girl overwhelmed with emotions that she couldn't handle, while Susana remained strong and composed. But the encounter brought new problems. Pedro would surely find out about the conversation. Then she wouldn't be able to pretend to be an oblivious wife anymore, and that was bad, very bad. Susana hadn't had enough time to prepare properly. Not all matters were settled. It was too early to reveal everything. That's why she proposed to Aurora to keep their conversation a secret, and the girl agreed eagerly and relievedly. It was clear that Pedro's bold initiative worried her as well. Therefore, Susana was confident in Aurora's silence. But she had little time left. She needed to act. Susana noticed that Pedro was spending more and more time with Aurora. Well, good for her. It made things much easier for Susana when her husband was absent. Physically easier. The only remaining issue was the apartment. Susana didn't want to leave their family home, and the children were happy here. She had put so much of her soul into this place. Choosing curtains and wallpaper, designing each room, buying lovely and cozy details. This was where they brought both children from the maternity hospital. And now? Should she give all of this to Pedro and his mistress? Or sell it? But when they got divorced, Pedro would need a place to live. He had to have somewhere to bring his lover, right? He was an adult, and he knew very well how Aurora would perceive him if he had to face domestic difficulties. Susana didn't yet know how to keep the apartment for herself, and her mind was constantly working on finding the right solution. Arturo, a doctor from the therapeutic department, sometimes sent her text messages. He asked how she was doing, offered help, inquired about her health, nothing special. Susana understood. He was testing the waters and giving her a chance to show that she needed him, waiting for a signal. And indeed, she needed Arturo. As soon as all of this was over, Susana would definitely call him. She dreamt of meeting him, of communicating outside the confines of the hospital. The man was very interesting and sensitive, witty, intelligent, and noble. It was pleasant just to be around him. Arturo's attention made it easier for Susana to bear her husband's betrayal. Even the hate-filled messages from Aurora became more bearable thanks to this new acquaintance. Susana desperately wanted to get to know this person better. But for now, she had more pressing matters to attend to. She couldn't afford any distractions. She needed to resolve the apartment issue. And finally, put an end to all of this and get divorced. The solution came unexpectedly to Susana. She accidentally heard a radio advertisement. It turned out that their city had introduced mortgage benefits for the elderly. This sparked an idea in her mind. I've come up with an idea for us to make money again. And we're talking about a very good sum, Susana said. What have you come up with? Pedro's eyes lit up. We'll sell my aunt's apartment. There are great benefits for the elderly now. With the money we'll get, I can buy myself a car, and there will still be plenty left. A lot. Your aunt's apartment. Pedro was intrigued by the opportunity to make money out of thin air, but he clearly had doubts. Don't worry, she won't let us down. My aunt is a reliable person. And then, after a year, we'll transfer the apartment back to us. Isn't it a great idea? All right, Pedro agreed after brief consideration. He had a summer trip planned with Aurora, and he wanted to make that trip magical for her, so the extra money would certainly come in handy. Besides, he knew his wife's aunt very well. She was someone they didn't need to worry about, an honest woman. When the apartment became her aunt's property, Susana immediately filed documents for divorce. She didn't inform her husband, of course. In the application, the woman provided an incorrect phone number for Pedro, switching 2 digits. She did it to prevent the authorities from calling her spouse and revealing the secret. For now, Pedro was still unaware of her actions. Susana understood that sooner or later, her husband would be summoned to court. Therefore, she made it a rule to check the mailbox every day. She would destroy any letters addressed to Pedro from the court. The divorce process was in full swing, while the man remained completely unaware, enjoying a beach vacation with his young lover. And after the specified period, the spouses were divorced without Pedro's presence. Finally, Susana was free. Everything worked out exactly as she had planned. To celebrate this long-awaited event, she decided to meet with Arturo. She initiated the conversation by writing to him for the first time, and he immediately called her back. It was pleasant to realize that someone valued her so much that they responded right away, despite being busy. Susana and Arturo had a wonderful evening. They first sat in a cafe and then took a walk along the waterfront. The man emitted so much warmth and attention that the woman completely melted. It was delightful for her to be in the company of this intelligent person. Susana was flattered by his admiring glances and refined compliments. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be desired and loved. "When will we meet again?" Arturo asked when the walk came to an end. "I don't know. I have some special circumstances at the moment, but I'll tell you later. Everything is complicated, but I would never part with you if it weren't for these troubles." Upon hearing these words, Arturo brightened up and smiled. "I don't want to let you go either," he said. "But, since you're busy, I'll wait. Can I at least call you?" "You should," Susana replied seriously. She returned home in a lifted mood. Susana felt beautiful and loved once again. How she missed this feeling in her marriage with Pedro. And his indifference had become the norm. Until recently, Susana believed that everyone lived that way in a marriage. Pedro arrived at the school gates. He met Aurora there every time, and she enjoyed sitting in the passenger seat of his beautiful foreign car, attracting envious glances. Pedro understood this somewhat vain desire of the girl, so he played along with her. He would rather park in the neighboring yard to avoid drawing attention. Pedro couldn't help himself anymore. He couldn't imagine life without this young beauty. Next to Aurora, he felt young and brave again. The 15-year age difference, of course, bothered him. But the most important thing was that they were happy together. He didn't suspect that he was still capable of such feelings and actions. Aurora made him want to do heroic deeds. Pedro showered his young lover with expensive gifts just to see her radiant smile in response. There were, of course, downsides to such a relationship. Many downsides, to be completely honest. Throughout the entire year of their affair, Pedro had to come up with explanations for his family. Lying and fearing that everything would be revealed, such a feeling was unpleasant. It was simply impossible to get used to. And to make matters worse, Aurora started getting upset too. The girl wanted more attention, more time together. Pedro did too. Life with his wife had become gray and monotonous. And here, there were such vibrant emotions, a joyful time spent together. The financial aspect was also a strain. Pedro had to take on many side jobs to prevent his wife from noticing the sudden reduction in the family budget. After all, meeting Aurora was not a cheap pleasure. But it was worth it, of course. The fact remained that he now needed much more money for gifts, restaurant and cafe visits, trips, and travels. All of this required a considerable amount. It was fortunate that Susana suggested the ideas with the apartment and the car. It left him with some decent money in his hands, at least for a while. Now, the man could finally breathe and relax. Today, he arrived at the school to pick up Aurora for the last time. It was her final day as an assistant coach. She would need to prepare intensively for university admission. Pedro was worried that she would enroll in a university, change her circle of friends. And who knows, perhaps she would find new friends and even a new love interest within the walls of the educational institution, some student or a young teacher. In the university, she would definitely have more choices than she did now. And Aurora, so vibrant, so beautiful, simply stunning. Surely, she would quickly attract admirers. Pedro was already jealous of her in advance. And suddenly, no, it couldn't be. Pedro noticed a woman approaching his car. From a distance, she resembled his wife, but what was she doing here? Susana should be at work. Yet, it was indeed her. Susana smiled widely and even waved at him. Then she opened the car door and settled in the back seat. Why specifically the back seat? Surprised? The wife inquired. Well, yes, kinda, Pedro admitted. How did you end up here? Susana smiled. Her husband was clearly nervous. No wonder. Because his nymph would soon appear on the porch and briskly walk towards the car. How would he explain all this to his wife? The woman didn't rush to reveal her knowledge to her spouse. She was interested in seeing how he would wriggle out of the situation. I stopped by Viola's. Remember, my former colleague? We ran into each other for work. I step out, and there's our car. So, what brings you here? Me? I arranged to meet with Jorge's trainer. The man finally found an answer. We need to discuss some matters regarding the next year. How interesting. Why didn't you tell me? Well, he only sent the text today. I would have told you in the evening. How lucky I am to have you. Susana smiled. You're such a wonderful husband and an exemplary father. It's probably time for you to go to work, right? Pedro became increasingly nervous. Let me give you a ride since we've met. I'll swing by the coach afterward. No, I actually have a lot of free time. Susana objected. Viola and I resolved everything earlier than planned. So let's go to the coach together, all right? I've been wanting to know about our son's progress for a long time, and this is a great opportunity. Susana enjoyed watching her husband, who now resembled a snake in a frying pan. His face was tense. His brain, in haste, tried to generate a solution and find a way out. Time was running out. For Susana, it was a moment of triumph that she had been working towards for a long time, enduring torment and pain that once drove her to the hospital. I remembered, I need to go to work. Pedro finally squeezed out an explanation that wasn't very believable. I have to go urgently. I'll drop you off on the way. The man had already turned the ignition key, but Susana stopped him. No need to go anywhere. I know everything. What do you know? Pedro turned his pale face towards her. About your fling on the side. And for how long? Over 6 months. And why didn't you say anything? At first, I didn't even know where to start. And then I had other plans. Plans you made behind my back? Pedro attacked. Maybe you started seeing someone to get back at me? We haven't become lovers yet, but I have someone who cares about me, Susana confessed, thinking of Arturo. I'm surprised by your reaction. You even try to blame me when you're the one who betrayed. You're partly to blame too. Pedro finally regained control. Kids, work, household chores. Life with you became dull and monotonous. I felt like a robot. And with her, life became vibrant and exciting. Susana continued for her husband. I understand. Of course, it's all my fault. Who would have doubted that you would justify your ugly actions this way? So, what do we do now? You'll find out soon. I've already decided everything for both of us. You're quick. I had a temporary head start. Actually, I wanted to ask you a long time ago, have you ever put yourself in her parents' shoes? Imagine if our daughter went through something like this. Carolina suddenly started dating a married man. Would you be happy? Susana hit another sore spot for Pedro. Of course, he thought about it, that he was taking away the best years of a young girl and that her father would probably want to have a man-to-man talk with him if he found out about everything. He thought about it, but he couldn't do anything about his feelings for the young beauty. Now, it's probably time to pay the price for those happy months. Pedro felt guilt towards her, but at the same time, he justified himself by believing that everyone has a right to personal happiness. And then, both spouses noticed Aurora fluttering out of the gates. Please, don't say anything bad to her, Pedro pleaded. She's not at fault, she's even, in a sense, a victim. A victim? Susana smirked. Are you completely blind? Can't you see your little daisy with sharp teeth? Meanwhile, Aurora, in her usual manner, swung open the car door and settled into the passenger seat. She hadn't yet noticed Susana sitting in the back. The girl kissed Pedro, paying no attention to his pale and troubled appearance. Well, that's it. I won't set foot in this wretched place ever again. A new life begins. Congratulations. Susana chimed in. Aurora startled in surprise and turned around. Her beautiful face contorted into an angry grimace. What are you doing here? The girl asked. Just sitting, Susana simply replied. So, now that we're all here, we can begin. Pedro, kick this creature out immediately. The girl squealed. But the man seemed petrified. Taking advantage of the pause, Susana continued. My dear lovers, I declare honestly and openly, I have no intention of standing in the way of your happiness. May you live long and happily. I won't bother you anymore. Who would have doubted it? Aurora sneered. Of course, I won. The choice between a young beauty and an old hag is obvious. And now, disregarding the insults, Susana arrived at the most interesting part of her story. And now, I kindly ask you to vacate the seats in my car. Taking walks together, especially in such wonderful weather, is so romantic. What is she babbling about? The girl protested. Pedro, why are you silent? So, what was the point of all this? The man pondered. So, these ideas of making money weren't just a coincidence? Did you already know everything back then? Exactly. What a fool I am. Pedro exclaimed. The apartment is now only yours too? Mine and our children's, Susana corrected. I'll be raising them alone now, so everything is fair, in my opinion. Pedro, please, finally explain to me what all this means. Demanded Aurora. The man remained stunned and silent. The realization of his own predicament was gradually sinking in. On the other hand, Susana could speak freely and took pleasure in briefly revealing everything about her husband's mistress. You're such a swine. The girl summed up. And you're a fool. The last statement was directed at Pedro, who didn't even attempt to object. Well, now get out of my car, Susana requested. Pedro, you can come for your belongings in the evening. I'll try to gather them by then. I won't let you divorce me right now. The man seized his last chance. While the process drags on, we'll transfer the apartment into joint ownership and divide it in half. It would be fair since we both contributed to it. Oh, did I forget to tell you? Susana pretended to be surprised. We're already divorced, aren't we? As proof of her words, she presented the astonished couple with the corresponding document. So, my dear, he's completely yours now. You'll have your love nest, Won't you? Well, that's it. Get out of my car. It's time for me to go. Pedro and Aurora had no choice but to comply. I didn't know you were such scum, Pedro gritted his teeth, seething with anger. Likewise, Susana parried. The woman drove to work in her beloved Volkswagen, which Pedro adored and took great care of. But now he would have to be a pedestrian for a while. And overall, serious problems had arisen in his life. Susana had envisioned this moment of truth so many times, contemplating her lines and possible responses from her husband, relishing the details. And now, finally, it had all happened. She felt light and calm in her soul. Susana saw herself as the victor. And then, her phone chimed, displaying Arturo's number. This call was exactly what Susana needed to complete her happiness. Aurora was furious. So, Pedro was a complete fool? How could he be so foolish? How did he allow his wife to manipulate him so easily? Right now, the man looked pitiful and lost. He evoked nothing but disgust from Aurora, both emotionally and physically. In fact, she felt nauseous. Although that had been happening to her quite often lately. She needed to check her stomach. But for now, she needed to get away from Pedro, as his wife had just demolished him against the wall. And he didn't even utter a word in protest. What a doormat! How could she have fallen in love with such a worthless man? Without his fancy car and money, he instantly lost his appeal in Aurora's eyes. Silently, the girl turned around and walked away. The man tried to stop her. Get lost. The girl sharply replied, jerking her hand away. You are complete zero. Don't you dare call me or try to pursue me in any way. I'll tell my father, and he won't leave you in one piece. And you already have enough problems on your plate. Figure it out yourself. Pedro was left alone in the parking lot. He helplessly slumped down on the sidewalk, burying his head in his hands. Just recently, the man had been almost happy, a family, a stable job, a comfortable life. And a young nymph as his lover. The only thing that had clouded his life was the need to juggle his attention between his family and Aurora. And now, he was left with nothing, as they say. Pedro couldn't understand what caused him greater pain, his wife's cold calculation that had expertly stripped him of everything, or Aurora's departure, realizing that their beautiful life was no more. He truly loved this vibrant young girl and was willing to do anything for her. Did she really not want to see him anymore? Did she truly consider him weak and spineless? Pedro called a taxi. He would go to his brother, who lived in a small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. His brother wouldn't turn him away and would let him stay until things improved. In the evening, he would have to retrieve his belongings from what was now a stranger's apartment. How could this have happened to him? What awaited him now? How could he go on? So many questions and no answers. Aurora was angry, very angry. And disappointed. She had considered Pedro a strong, confident man. And right before her eyes, Susana had completely crushed him. There was nothing left of him. And he didn't even resist. It was good that this had come to light now, before their relationship had gone too far. Although, perhaps it already had. Vague doubts tormented Aurora, nausea, heaviness in her stomach, changes in her taste preferences. It seemed like pregnancy. However, her cycles had been regular, so it was unlikely. Nevertheless, the girl decided to see a doctor, just in case there were any problems. It's a pregnancy, about 14 weeks along, the sonographer concluded. Aurora almost fell off the examination table. How is that possible? But, my cycles haven't been disrupted. It happens, the doctor shrugged. The fetus is developing well, and I can even tell you the gender. Everything is visible. What gender? What child are you talking about? There won't be one. I'll terminate this pregnancy. Well, it's a bit too late for that, the doctor informed her. The term is quite advanced, and termination is only permitted under specific circumstances. But the baby is healthy, so you'll soon become a happy mother. I can schedule you an appointment with a psychologist to work on your emotional state. After leaving the doctor's office, Aurora immediately called Pedro and unleashed her accusations on him. "You've ruined my life," she yelled into the phone. "What about my university? What about my career? What future do I have now? It's all because of you." Pedro, on the other end of the line, seemed almost relieved to Aurora, which infuriated her even more and sparked a new wave of anger. But Aurora knew that she couldn't handle this alone with a child. So, she would have to return to Pedro, at least for a while. They found themselves in a rented apartment. Pedro chose a convenient location, a school, a nursery, a children's clinic, everything a mother and child needed were nearby. Pedro spoke about all these things as if they were a stroke of luck, but Aurora didn't share his enthusiasm. Her relationship with her parents had soured, just as expected when she broke the news of her pregnancy. She had to tell them about her affair with an older man as well. Her mother was clutching her heart, and her father demanded to get his hands on that scoundrel. Aurora tried to calm everyone down, describing Pedro's virtues in every possible way. She lied about their otherworldly love. It was all to pacify her parents. It was beneficial for her. Aurora realized that she couldn't raise the child alone. It had to be either Pedro or her parents. But living with her parents wasn't an ideal option. They would smother her with their overprotectiveness and constant reproaches. Yes, they would help with the baby without question. Financially, there would be no worries either. However, she would have to endure daily lectures about her reckless behavior and the ruined future. And she would have to tolerate their constant monitoring of her every move. No, she couldn't bear that. On the other hand, manipulating Pedro was much easier. Besides, he was genuinely in love with her. He would try to fulfill her every wish, just as before. Life would be easier and more pleasant with him, as much as it was possible given the situation they were in. Gradually, Aurora managed to reconcile her parents with the idea of an adult son-in-law. No, they didn't accept him. The relationship between her mother, father, and Pedro was strained. Her parents continued to blame him for what had happened to their daughter, as they had different expectations for her life. But at least they approved of their cohabitation and seemed somewhat appeased. It was something. Aurora's condition left much to be desired. She was constantly nauseous, her skin was covered in pimples, and she had constant cravings. Her once well-defined figure began to blur around the waist and hips. Swelling tormented her. She could no longer fit into her favorite beautiful clothes. She had to replenish her wardrobe with new dresses and trousers. Essentially, they were pastel-colored sacks, the only type available in budget stores for pregnant women. Pedro couldn't afford anything more decent at the moment. His ex-wife had left him with virtually nothing. But he tried very hard. He worked a lot and did odd jobs. And one evening, coming home from another gig with a mysterious smile, he placed a thick stack of large bills in front of Aurora. "Where did these come from?" she asked in surprise. "Did you really earn that much?" "No," Pedro replied. "It's from Susana." It turns out she had been saving her salaries since she found out about us, preparing for her departure. And today, we were talking to her on the phone about our children, and I mentioned that their brother would be born soon. She withdrew the money from their joint account and brought it to me. She thought it was fair since she got to keep the apartment and the car. "Fair?" Aurora exclaimed indignantly. "Is it fair that she orchestrated all of this behind your back? Is it fair that you spent your earnings on the family while she was saving her salary because of it? Did you bow down at her feet, by any chance?" "Aurora, Susana didn't have to give me anything. She just felt sorry for us when she found out about the baby, and..." "Sorry? She can shove her pity where the sun doesn't shine. That money rightfully belongs to you. Just like a share of the apartment and the car. How I hate her." Aurora slammed the door and locked herself in the bedroom. They needed the money, that was true. But Susana's behavior stirred up the anger that had already subsided in Aurora. She despised that cunning, calculated woman with all her soul. She blamed her for all her misfortunes. Susana was now living it up in a spacious apartment, and Aurora had even seen her with her new lover. He seemed like quite a catch, intelligent and prosperous. Definitely not a loser like Pedro. She had settled so well, that goat, and now she even showed her generosity. She probably considered herself kind and noble. I need to get revenge on her, suddenly crossed Aurora's mind. Yes, that's right, get revenge, so that life wouldn't seem like a bed of roses for her. Because everything was going too smoothly for Susana. Aurora smiled to herself, feeling a sense of relief. She didn't plan anything serious, but she would definitely rattle Susana's nerves. Susana was driving home from work when she received a call on her mobile phone from an unknown number. She answered, thinking it might be work-related. Hello, a mature male voice spoke on the other end. Can I inquire about the cost of your services? My services? Susana was surprised. But I don't provide any services. Strange, your number was listed in the advertisement. It must be some mistake. Susana pressed the end call button, but the phone immediately rang again. This time it was a different unknown number. So, do you have young girls working there, or what? A gruff bass voice came through the phone. Where do you mean there? At the massage parlor. What? Susana said, taken aback. That's the one, the man replied. I'm calling about the ad. Don't worry, I'm a real client, not some sort of inspection. I'm just calling to inquire about the staff. You've got the wrong person, Susana responded. Since then, Susana's phone had been constantly bombarded with strange calls. Some mistook her for a woman of loose morals, while others discussed the sale of horse manure or the cleaning of septic tanks for country cottages. It continued all day long and greatly disrupted her life. The worst part was that Susana couldn't simply change her phone number or ignore calls from unknown numbers since many of them were work-related. Susana searched the internet for ads and accounts with her information, deleting them, but it hardly made a difference as new ones quickly surfaced. Of course, Susana knew who was behind all of this. She even called Pedro, asking him to calm down the enraged young woman. But he staunchly believed in Aurora's innocence. He thought it was some woman who had her sights set on Arturo. Susana also turned to the police. They accepted her statement, but the case didn't progress much as there were no specialists in the department who dealt with such matters. Fortunately, Arturo came to Susana's aid. He used his connections to reach a computer genius who easily traced the IP address of the culprit. As expected, it turned out to be Aurora. Susana went back to the police, and this time they were delighted to see her. No wonder. She practically handed them the culprit on a silver platter. Another case solved, a big plus for the department. Aurora was summoned to the investigator, and she didn't even try to resist. It would have been pointless. She faced serious charges, a hefty fine, and had to pay a substantial amount of compensation to Susana as the victim, a turn of events Aurora hadn't anticipated. However, Susana graciously declined the compensation, explaining that it was for the sake of the baby who was about to be born. Pedro, with tears in his eyes, thanked her profusely, while Aurora seethed with anger towards her benefactor, who once again emerged victorious. And not only that, but she did it so beautifully, so magnanimously. Rage boiled within Aurora, demanding an outlet. Pedro became her target as she unloaded all her grievances on him and poured out the pain of shattered plans. He patiently endured her attacks, which only fueled Aurora's anger further. How condescending he was. Explaining the quirks of his young wife with her pregnancy. How he irritated her, and how she despised Susana. Even towards the child growing in her own womb, the expectant mother felt nothing but negativity. Aurora was livid. Instead of pursuing her studies at the university and making new acquaintances, instead of the vibrant student life she had dreamt of, she was faced with diapers, domestic chores, and practically a pauper's existence. With her appearance, plans, and ambitions, it seemed so unjust. Did Pedro regret leaving his family? Absolutely. At first, life with Aurora seemed like a fairy tale, even in a rented apartment. Starting over was not a problem. Pedro was willing to move mountains for his young and beautiful wife. The phone call from Aurora that day brought him great joy. They were going to have a baby. What a blessing that was. Without it, Aurora probably wouldn't have returned to him. Now they would have a family, and life was falling back into place. Pedro wasn't particularly fond of his bachelor existence in his younger brother's apartment, where there were always friends of the young host coming and going. Over the years of marriage with Susana, he had grown accustomed to domestic comfort, cleanliness, and stability. And now, he would have all that again. Pedro found a wonderful apartment in a great neighborhood. Based on his experience, he knew it would be convenient for them to live there with a child. However, Aurora didn't share his enthusiasm for domestic matters. Aurora and Pedro never had a proper wedding. Once upon a time, Aurora dreamed of a grand celebration, a luxurious dress, and a crowd of guests. But given the circumstances, even she understood that it wasn't appropriate. Her parents openly despised Pedro, and they didn't make much effort to hide it. During their first meeting, her father was clearly restraining himself from pouncing on Pedro with his fists. Pedro and Aurora simply signed the papers, without guests or any traditional wedding attributes. However, Pedro did give her a gift, the latest model iPhone. Her eyes lit up with genuine joy, unlike before when they first started dating, and Pedro thought that everything was falling into place. How wrong he was. Aurora became nervous, irritable, embittered, and demanding. Previously, she had seemed like a delicate flower to Pedro, an enamored nymph who shared his interests and could find beauty in the most ordinary things. But now, Aurora had transformed into a person who would fly off the handle at the slightest provocation. She nitpicked every little detail. Pedro was to blame for everything, starting from her morning sickness and ending with the neighbor who constantly drilled right above their heads. Pedro tried to attribute these changes to stress and hormonal fluctuations that occur in pregnant women's bodies. But something told him that it wasn't just that. More precisely, not only that. Aurora's behaviors sometimes frightened him. She devised a very unsightly way to seek revenge on Susana. Pedro had no clue and didn't believe his ex-wife when she turned to him for help. But it turned out that Aurora was indeed the culprit. Susana's new partner had identified her, and Aurora was even summoned to the police station. Pedro personally accompanied his young wife there and later dealt with the investigator who drove his pregnant wife to hysteria. Aurora caused many problems, and Pedro couldn't help but compare her to Susana. Susana was completely different. She never complained about trivial matters or threw tantrums. They had formed a wonderful team, a well-established household, stability, and enjoyed family outings. Pedro wasn't even upset with his ex-wife for what she had done with their property. He understood that she did it for the sake of their children. Many times, he wished he could turn back time. If he had the opportunity, he would never make that fateful mistake again. Yes, Pedro definitely regretted how things turned out. He endured Aurora's tantrums, worked, and eagerly awaited the birth of his son. What else was there for him to do now? Susana felt that everything was going as it should. The suffering over her husband was a thing of the past. Why would she want a weak person next to her, capable of betrayal? Someone who had long taken her care and attention for granted without giving anything in return. No, Pedro was almost ideal as a father. But as a husband, as a lover, as a life partner. Maybe he never truly loved her. Susana realized this only now, with the appearance of Arturo in her life. It was a matter of contrast. He turned out to be that sturdy wall behind which it felt cozy to hide. Susana felt that no matter what happened, Arturo would not let her down, reliable, intelligent, self-assured. Most importantly, he loved and valued her. Arturo made an effort to surprise and impress Susana every day. He quickly bonded with Jorge and Carolina and even managed to establish a relationship with Pedro as the father of his beloved wife's children. Arturo suggested that they all live together in his country mansion, which he inherited from his parents. His parents had recently moved to Australia to help his sister with the children. Susana pondered over this proposal for a long time and eventually agreed. The participation and enthusiasm of her son and daughter played a role in this decision. They loved visiting Arturo's place. Both fell in love with the beautiful, spacious house and the large garden with a swimming pool where they could have so much fun. And when they realized that they had the opportunity to live there, they unitedly persuaded their mother to take this responsible step. In the end, Susana gave in. She didn't prohibit Pedro from seeing the children. Jorge and Carolina still loved him, and he loved them. In that regard, everything remained the same. At first, their son and daughter were very upset about their father leaving the family, but the kids quickly understood that he would still be their dad, loving, caring, and attentive. So, they took the situation lightly. Moreover, Pedro and Susana behaved with utmost politeness. They didn't argue or hurl accusations at each other. Both understood that what had happened was a natural and fair outcome. Susana saw how Pedro struggled in his relationship with Aurora, who behaved like a hysterical person. Take, for example, her pathetic attempt to seek revenge on Susana. Yes, it definitely tested Susana's nerves, but in the end, Aurora only made things worse for herself. Susana saw the state she was in when she left the police station. She chose not to demand any moral compensation from her. Aurora and Pedro already had enough problems, and their child would be born very soon. And this little baby, who was Carolina and Jorge's sibling, was certainly not to blame for anything. Susana genuinely felt sorry for Pedro and Aurora. But, on the other hand, she was fully aware that they were both to blame for what had happened. So, she wasn't particularly tormented by worries about them. They made their choices, now they had to deal with the consequences. After all, nothing terrible had happened in the end. They were all alive and well. They just had to work, settle their lives, and raise the child. Everyone got what they fought for. Susana, for example, always sought stability, financial independence, equal relationships, love, and respect. And now she had it all, her children and a beloved man by her side. Yes, Arturo wasn't their biological father, but his presence in Carolina and Jorge's lives would give them a lot. It already was. The children had genuinely grown attached to him, and Arturo enjoyed spending time with them. Now he was hinting to Susana that he wouldn't mind having a child together. He didn't pressure or insist on it, that wasn't his style. Susana hadn't made up her mind yet. Perhaps it was still too early. There were already many changes in her life and the lives of her children. But thoughts of the baby, their baby with Arturo, were very pleasant and warmed her soul. She felt that she would indeed become a mother to multiple children, even though she had never imagined herself in that role before. But with Arturo, there was nothing to fear. The phone rang, and it was Arturo. Susana had noticed that whenever she thought of him, he somehow immediately made his presence felt. It was like an invisible connection. "Hello, my love," the familiar voice came through the receiver, instantly making Susana feel warm and calm. "What are you up to?" "Just packing and getting ready to move," she replied. "At last, I convinced you." "I can't believe it." "I dream of that time coming as soon as possible." "Well, we don't have to wait much longer. I was thinking, you have a vacation coming up, and I have one too, and the kids will be on break. How about the four of us taking a trip to Australia? You'll finally get to meet my family. They're really looking forward to it. Plus, we'll have an amazing time together." The prospects that opened up for Susana took her breath away. A whole month living by the ocean, splashing in the warm waves, listening to the sound of the surf, and breathing in the fresh sea air. Life had turned into a fairy tale full of surprises and pleasant things with Arturo. Susana understood, she had truly earned it all.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.